So a right-wing plot to take over San Francisco? This is an amazing story. Gil Duran is a writer and journalist based out of San Francisco. He writes on a Substack newsletter called theframelab.org. That's the website, theframelab.org. And his Twitter handle is Gil Duran, Gilduran. Gil, welcome to the program. I'm so glad you could join us.
Thanks for having me, Tom.
My pleasure. So first off, tell us about the Frame Lab.
Frame Lab is a newsletter about politics, meta-narrative, and morality that I write and co-founded with Dr. George Lakoff. So we analyze politics from the perspective of the underlying language and messaging frames in place and attempt to put all of the political noise in that very specific context.
Yeah, and you guys do a brilliant job of it, by the way. I encourage everybody to go to theframelab.org and sign up. It's free. It's a free newsletter. And you're just doing great work. I've been reading it for quite some time now. So this piece that you published, I guess it was yesterday or the day before, Tech Authoritarians of San Francisco. Tell us about this. How'd you get out of this story and what's going on here?
Well, I've been covering San Francisco politics for a while now. I was the editorial page editor of the San Francisco Examiner, and I've lived in the Bay Area most of my adult life. And over the past few years, we've seen these tech figures, typically with lots of money, sometimes billions of dollars, but not always, start to emerge in a more aggressive way in local politics. They played a big role in last year's recall of District Attorney Chesa Boudin and several school board members. And now they're back with a much bigger plan, which is to take control of the San Francisco Board of Supervisors, which is sort of the city council that governs the city, and also to take control of the mayor's office. And it seems that their big plan in doing this is simply to impose a very retrograde, regressive, and Republican policy platform on the city of San Francisco, which has, as most people know, some very serious problems.
You talk in your article about the strict father frame and Elon Musk specifically, but more generally this whole strict father frame. You want to explain that the strict father versus nurturing family? George Lakoff had come up with this some time ago. I think it's brilliant, and how that worldview is informing this effort.
Yeah, what George Lakoff did about 25, 30 years ago in a book called Moral Politics was outline the categories that define Republican thinking. You have to understand that a lot of our thinking is metaphorical and a lot of our thinking is unconscious, and this is especially true when it comes to politics. And the main metaphor we have in politics is the metaphor of the family. And if you are to categorize the different beliefs of progressives and conservatives, you see that on one hand, you have people who think that everything should be top down. There should be a strict hierarchy. There should be punishment and discipline. And if you don't do good, you won't have good. If you're poor, it's because you're lazy or have some other moral flaw. On the other hand, the progressive mode of thought, which is called the nurturant parent mode of thought, is more based in empathy and the idea that we must care for one another. And that it doesn't mean we have to be weak or let bad things happen or let crime run rampant, but that we have to have approaches that are rooted in evidence and rooted in progress and empathy as opposed to punishment. And so what we see largely in the ideas of these emerging tech authoritarians is a very strict father viewpoint of how policy should work. And if you look at their tendency to believe that they're more important than anyone else and should have more power than anyone else, it's because they're richer than anyone else. And Dr. Lakoff spells out pretty clearly in something called the conservative moral hierarchy the exact order in which Republicans believe society should be run. It should be men having more power than women, the wealthy having more power than everybody else, the strong or disciplined having more power than the undisciplined or the weak, straight people having more power than gays, Christians having more power than other religions. And so when you see Elon Musk get on Twitter and have a racist conspiracy theory meltdown about how immigrants are replacing us, it all fits squarely into these frames. I read Walter Isaacson's biography of Elon Musk, all 600 and 30 pages of it. And he took a lot of fire for that because it didn't say what people wanted it to say. But I think it's all there between the lines. I think the most important thing to understand about Musk and about many of these other tech bros who are trying to be like Musk is Elon Musk believes he's the most important person on Earth. He believes he's the most important in history. He believes he is the savior of humanity. Therefore, it follows from that everyone should do as he says, and he should be allowed to operate without any rules or regulations because he's simply more important. It may sound like I'm exaggerating to say this, but this is what comes out of Elon Musk's mouth himself. He believes that he has to make us a multiplanetary species. Anybody he crushes or anything he breaks on the way to that is not important in the long term.
I think Trump feels the same way about himself. So how does this translate into policy in San Francisco? If these tech bros succeed in taking over the city council and the mayor's office, what sort of changes should the citizens of San Francisco expect?
Not too many, I'd say. I'd probably say they should expect problems to get a little worse. The ideas they have for cracking down on crime are basically mass incarceration and aggressive policing, which has always failed to take care of the problem. Crime rates tend to be higher in Republican states, highest in Republican states. They also plan to completely remove all harm reduction and use jail as a cure for drug addiction. That doesn't work either. In fact, the states with the highest overdose rates are Republican states that don't have a widespread harm reduction. If you go to the Philippines, Duterte, during his reign of terror, made it legal for police to kill drug users and drug dealers. They killed thousands, and then they gave up because that didn't work either. So it's these very oversimplified, strict, and cruel solutions that haven't worked anywhere else and won't work here. In fact, a lot of the history of San Francisco is politicians engaging in these very highly publicized crackdowns that still failed to deliver results. If brutal crackdowns were going to work in San Francisco, they would have worked 20 or 30 years ago. It's an idea that they're going back to. That's why I call it regressive. It's not a new idea. There's no innovation here. It's just the desire to exert power and control through punishment and cruelty that seems to be their main interest. In addition to making sure that nobody can get in their way when they use San Francisco streets as a laboratory for their robot cars and what have you.
We're talking to Gil Duran. He's a writer and journalist based out of San Francisco, who writes for theframelab.org, theframelab.org, just one of the really great Substack newsletters. Gil, we've seen these studies over the years showing, for example, they did the traffic studies where they had cameras looking at intersections and found that the more expensive the car, the more likely the person driving it was to break traffic laws or to cut people off in traffic, to behave poorly. And there's been speculation over the years that as people get wealthier, they actually become a little more sociopathic. And then on the other hand, there are people arguing that no, it's that the sociopaths, have the ability to get wealthy because they'll break the rules and thus end up as multimillionaires or billionaires. Your thoughts on how sociopathy or however you would define that, is driving this political battle in San Francisco that you see coming?
Well, I think that research has shown that the more power or money someone gets, and those two are often very connected, the more they are devoid of empathy, can reduce your empathy for others. And I think that's what's really at the heart of this. I can't really diagnose the sociopathy. It certainly seems to match in some cases. If you Google people without empathy, for instance, you'll get some interesting results. But I do think that this is about these wealthy people don't understand why they should have to see so much poverty. Why can't this just be a cleaned up Singapore where we don't allow poor people to be visible? And they don't seem to ask the question of what are the conditions of a society that creates a city with more billionaires than almost anywhere in the world, where people are living in tents and suffering in addiction on the streets, and there is not enough resources or housing to help them. They don't seem to want to solve the problem of the cancerous inequality that is undermining our social fabric, but they definitely want to cage up some poor people and use the police to run off anybody who's got less than, a few million in the bank and can't afford to live here. So I think we're seeing that manifest as they can only see life through their own viewpoint. They have no interest or curiosity in understanding why things are getting so bad when we ostensibly have more than we ever have had. And that's because some people have everything and a lot of people have nothing. Yeah. And unless we find a real solution to this, it's going to get worse and worse. I spend a lot of time in Latin America. If you live in a very unequal society, you get used to some pretty awful stuff that becomes normal. Crime becomes normal. Yeah. Seeing people suffering becomes normal. They're not trying to innovate and solve that, though. They only want to go back to the 1800s or the 1700s and impose draconian solutions that will not solve the problem, that will only punish the problem.
I've worked extensively in the third world and had a similar perception. Gil Duran, check out the newsletter, theframelab.org. You can sign up for free. It's brilliant. Gil, thanks so much for dropping by today.